Game night here on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig hanging out with you, and the most anticipated UFC event of the year. It's finally here. It's tomorrow. And yes, Khabib Nurmagomedov is finally getting back into the octagon, and he's fighting Justin Gaethje. Catch all the action. ESPN Plus pay-per-view. You don't want to miss this. 2 o'clock is the main card. Of course, the prelims drop at around 12 p.m. Eastern time. And joining us right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, you've heard him before here on 97.3 ESPN. Marc Raimondi works for ESPN, covers MMA, and he joins us here on game night. Mark, how you doing today?
I'm good, Josh. How are you, man?
I'm doing pretty good. So, as I said, we finally get Khabib back in the octagon, and some people are looking at this fight and they're wondering, they know who Khabib is, but for the casual fan, they're not as informed who Justin Gaethje is. So just kind of get into a little bit about who Gaethje is and why this is a tough matchup for Khabib.
Definitely, and it is definitely a very tough matchup for Khabib. Arguably the toughest matchup that he has right now in the UFC lightweight division. For those who don't know who Justin Gaethje is, I guess there's one thing that you can say to describe him. He's pound for pound possibly the most exciting fighter in the UFC. He has not gone to a decision in 6 years. He either knocks you out or gets knocked out. He does not go to the judges. His nickname is the highlight. So something interesting is going to happen. He's coming off that big finish of Tony Ferguson back at UFC 249 in May, and he's a wild man. He's a little reckless. He takes risks. He goes in there and tries to knock his opponent out. Does not mind getting knocked out himself. I will say that he has cleaned up his act a little bit in the last few fights. He's become a little bit more technical, a little more tactical, just as aggressive, and he's still knocking fighters out, but he's not putting himself in harm's way as much as before, but he's as exciting as ever. And for a guy like Khabib, who's a wrestler, this is the most dangerous guy that he's faced on the feet since Conor McGregor, and Justin Gaethje was a Division I wrestler as well, which Conor McGregor was not. So it's going to be very, very interesting, Josh, to see what happens tomorrow.
It's been suggested by people in the past that Khabib, in some ways, has kind of handpicked some of his fights along the way to get this massive undefeated record. So, what do you think led Khabib to say yes to a fight that arguably could put finally that loss on his record?
I don't know if I would agree that he's handpicked opponents. I think that the one thing about Khabib that you can say is that he doesn't fight all that often. He's had injury problems in the past. Also, he's a devout Muslim, and he honors and observes Ramadan every year, which keeps him out of action for a month. And he doesn't even like coming back right after Ramadan because you have to fast during the daylight hours during Ramadan. So he takes a few months after Ramadan to even get back into training camp. So he doesn't fight all that often. He fights once a year, maybe twice a year. So it's been hard to kind of match him up with the UFC schedule. But I mean, this fight against Justin Gaethje is the fight to make. I mean, he again, Gaethje's coming off that win over Tony Ferguson. That was for the interim title. There's no one better other than Khabib right now at lightweight than Justin Gaethje. Of course, there are a lot of good 155-pound fighters in the UFC, guys like McGregor and Dustin Poirier and Ferguson himself. But right now, Gaethje is the man, and this is legitimately number one versus number two, and I think that's why people are so excited about it.
What's at stake for Khabib's legacy? Because, if you get another win, you still have no losses on the record. I mean, that's something that's never been done at the lightweight division in UFC or MMA history. So, where does that leave him in terms of legacy and all-time in MMA history?
There's a ton of stakes in this fight, and I would say for Khabib, the stakes are higher than they are for Gaethje because, again, like you said, Josh, Khabib is undefeated. He's 28-0, and he really, really badly wants to go 30-0. That's a major goal for him, and he can't do that, of course, unless he beats Justin Gaethje on Saturday. And this is a hard fight for him. It's not McGregor where it's another superstar that Khabib is fighting, but in many ways Gaethje is a tougher opponent. The stakes are just as high, and Gaethje is even more of a tougher matchup for him than McGregor is, arguably. So a lot is riding on this for Khabib. I mean, if you want to go undefeated and you want to be the UFC lightweight champion long term, you have to win this fight. And another thing that goes along the line too, Josh, is if he wins this fight, Khabib, he'll have the most, he'll tie for the most lightweight title defenses in UFC history with 3. That's another big one. It kind of also cements him as one of the best lightweights of all time, not even just the best lightweight right now. And I think there's a very good case that if he wins this fight, you can say that Khabib Nurmagomedov is the best lightweight in MMA history.
Marc Raimondi joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Marc_Raimondi. Of course, UFC 254 is tomorrow at 2 o'clock. So you want to make sure you get yourself situated in front of the TV or in front of your device with ESPN Plus. Get that pay-per-view. You do not want to miss this card. It is a jam-packed card. And just continuing on down on that path with Khabib, he's also said this week that he still wants to fight George St. Pierre. And I know for a lot of MMA fans, that's one of those like fantasy fights you play on a video game or something. So how likely do you think that even would be, considering the fact that GSP hasn't even fought at 170 in a long time? I know Khabib's been fighting at 155 for a while, but he's had some tough weight cuts. So logistically, is GSP Khabib, if he wins tomorrow, even a legitimate possibility?
I think there is a possibility. I really do. And I had a chance to catch up with George St. Pierre 2 weeks ago in a video interview that ran on ESPN. And he's interested in this fight. And Khabib is really the only opponent that George St. Pierre would come back for. Of course, we haven't seen GSP since 2017 when he beat Michael Bisping to win the middleweight title. But he is retired. He's formally retired. He's not in the USADA drug testing pool, which signifies that a UFC fighter is retired. So GSP is legitimately retired, but he's still in great shape. He's 39. We've seen guys like Daniel Cormier fight into their 40s, and he still believes he is in top form. And it's hard to say otherwise because it is George St. Pierre. He's one of the very best. He's either one or two of the best fighters of all time, with John Jones. And Khabib is making his way up that list, that pound-for-pound best of all time list. And it would be quite the story to have Khabib fight George St. Pierre with Khabib looking to go 30-0. That would really be a compelling, incredible narrative that the UFC could put together to do that. On top of that, Josh, on top of all of that, that is a dream fight for Khabib. George St. Pierre was an idol of his growing up. He's always felt that George St. Pierre was the best fighter of all time. And the same thing for Khabib's late father, Abdulmanap, who passed away in July due to complications from the coronavirus. And in many ways, that fight would be a legacy fight for Khabib and his father. It would be kind of the fight that Khabib's dad wanted the most. And now that he's gone, now that he's passed away tragically, it would make that fight even more magnified, and it would make it even more just fascinating. So I think that there would be a lot of things at play to make that fight happen if Khabib was to get by Gaethje. Again, we're talking about stakes, we're talking about legacy. He's got to beat Gaethje to get to possibly the biggest fight of his career against George St. Pierre.
And that's what makes UFC 254 so juicy. ESPN Plus pay-per-view. Get your hands on it. Don't miss out. A couple other interesting fights I want to touch on with you, Mark, before I let you go. This fight for Robert Whittaker, I think, is very meaningful. I mean, he's a former champion at middleweight. He's one of these guys, I think, for the casual fan, gets overlooked because I don't think he ever got his just due when he was champion. And he had the win over Darren Till. Does a win tomorrow put him right back into that title picture?
It absolutely would. It would. And you're right about Robert Whittaker. He's perennially underrated, even though he was the middleweight champion. And we're talking about a guy who beat Yoel Romero in back-to-back fights. You don't just do that. He is excellent. He is top tier. And if he were to beat Jared Cannonier on Saturday, he would definitely be right back in that title mix. And that fight has a lot of meaning, not just in the middleweight division, but it has far-reaching stakes, I would say, across divisions. Because if Jared Cannonier wins, I think it would be pretty clear that he's next in line for Israel Adesanya. That's the fight that Adesanya is most interested in next because, of course, Adesanya has already knocked out Robert Whittaker. So Jared Cannonier would be the guy that makes the most sense because he's a fresh opponent, a fresh contender for Adesanya. Now, if Whittaker were to win, that could throw a possible monkey wrench into those plans because I'm not sure if the UFC goes back to that rematch with Adesanya and Whittaker. I'm not sure if they do that right away because really just last year, Adesanya knocked out Whittaker, as I said. So would that make a lot of sense to go back to that now? I don't know. that could open the door for Adesanya to go and fight someone like John Jones. So again, this fight, even though it's not involving Adesanya, there's no title on the line. It could have far-reaching effects across divisions, and taking into account some of the biggest stars in the UFC, like a John Jones or an Adesanya. So that all eyes will be on that fight on Saturday for sure.
You mentioned John Jones, so I would be remiss if I didn't touch with you on John Jones. Is basically the assumption right now is he's moving up to heavyweight. Is there any projected timetable on him actually fighting, or is he keeping that very close to the vest at this point?
He's definitely taking his time to try to put on muscle mass in order to go up to heavyweight. And the real question is going to be, how does the timeline shake out with the top of that heavyweight division? Right now, of course, Stipe Miocic, he fought in August. He beat Daniel Cormier. He's the undisputed champion at heavyweight. And the number one contender at heavyweight is Francis Ngannou. Now, earlier this week, Francis Ngannou tweeted that he has heard that Stipe Miocic does not want to come back until March, which would almost be a year since Ngannou's last fight. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean Ngannou takes a fight in the meantime? March is still a little bit away. March is still, quite a far amount away if you're doing this for a living and you only get paid when you fight. So that's a big question. And the reason why I'm relaying this information is because that also has to do with John Jones and his timeline. Because look, I don't think John Jones goes up to heavyweight to just fight anybody. He's going to go in there to fight either the top contender or the champion, and that's Francis Ngannou and Stipe Miocic. And if those two guys are not going to fight each other until March, where does that leave John Jones? Does that leave him not fighting till the winner of that fight? Who knows? Sometime, toward the middle or end of next year? That would make a whole lot of sense. So I think again, I have to go back to the Whittaker Cannonier fight. If Cannonier wins that fight, I think it'll be Adesanya versus Cannonier. But if Whittaker wins, I could see the UFC trying to put together that John Jones versus Israel Adesanya fight. Maybe it's 205, maybe at a catchweight. And these two guys have been going at it on Twitter since the moment that Adesanya beat Paulo Costa a few weeks ago. I'm talking about Adesanya and John Jones. So it makes sense. There's many options the UFC has, but right now, heavyweight, even though that's the plan for John Jones, the timeline doesn't seem to work out all that great. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next few weeks.
Those are just some of the layers you want to watch for UFC 254. That's tomorrow, 2 p.m. is the main card. ESPN Plus pay-per-view. Get your hands on the ESPN Plus subscription if you haven't already. And make sure to check out all of Marc Raimondi's coverage of the UFC. Follow him on Twitter at Marc_Raimondi. And as all guests, he appeared today on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Marc, always appreciate the time and the conversation.
Anytime for Jersey. I'm a New Yorker myself, so I got love for the NJ.